Welcome to The Creative Influencer, where we discuss all things creative with an emphasis on influencers. The Creative Influencer is hosted by John Pfeiffer. John is an entertainment attorney in Santa Monica, California, who represents influencers and other creatives.
This is episode 6 of the 5th season of the Creative Influencer podcast. Today we interview Adrian Lurie. Adrian is co-founder of Dragonfruit Media, a video production and YouTube agency. Adrian discusses current YouTube engagement best practices with an eye to how the most engaging content bridges a curiosity gap for the audience through storytelling. This is essentially a masterclass from a YouTube expert on how influencers, or really anyone, can make their YouTube page better and build an audience as a result. Enjoy. I'm joined today by Adrian Lurie. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Adrian works for a company called Dragonfruit Media. And according to your website, it helps businesses and creators maximize engagement on YouTube. But what is Dragonfruit Media and exactly what do you do?
That's a great question. Dragonfruit Media is at its core, a YouTube agency. We like to say, it's pretty corny, but we like to say that we are making the best content in the world to make the world a better place. And so as the description you read mentions, we work with businesses and creators in order to use essentially organic and original content that is educational and entertainment driven to reach audiences, expand that reach, offer new value, and basically grow your audience and therefore grow your overall value.
Yeah, so this is basically going to be a tutorial from a YouTube expert on how influencers, or really anybody, could make their YouTube page better and build an audience as a result. So what is your position at Dragonfruit?
I am the co-founder and creative director.
And how did this path start?
Yeah, so my background is in psychology, theater, and screenwriting. And I always knew that there was something special about storytelling. And I always felt that one of the key purposes of storytelling was education, and education through inspiration. And so I actually spent 2 years with the Peace Corps after college, working as a teacher in the Dominican Republic. And I think when I came back to LA and I was thinking about entertainment and media and that sort of work, it felt like there could be a really great way to synthesize content with education. And so I worked with an SEO agency for a little bit. And they obviously, this is something that's done very often in written content, in blog writing and articles. And but I saw there was a big opportunity for doing this with video, and realized that a lot of the philosophies around content marketing could actually be applied to more artistic or story focused or story centric, narrative focused video content. And so that's what we started doing. We started making videos for people and helping people tell their story and helping people educate and inspire and offer value through video content. And then Dragonfruit was born.
And we'll get to we'll get down in the weeds on how to make better stories. But you call it the low-hanging optimization fruit. Mm-hmm. There were 4 tips that make perfect sense when you think about them. But I wanted to go through them quickly with you. The first is fix your about page. What about that?
Yeah, this is a really subtle one. And this is something I think this would fall under the category of sort of channel hygiene, right? The about page is often the second place that people go to find out what your channel is about and why they should subscribe to your channel. And there's that journey in and of itself, right? There is someone visits a channel page, And one of the first things they do is they go to the about page to figure out, should I subscribe to this person? So if your about page is blank, you've now just often missed the very first touch point with a potential new subscriber. The other thing about the about page is if you go and search your channel, for example, and as opposed to, besides just the videos that come up in the search page, you'll see channels appear in the search page, right, in YouTube. And it says the name of the channel, and directly below it, it shows the very first sentence of the about copy. So it is a great opportunity in at least two different areas to get that sort of top of funnel engagement for potential new subscribers.
Tip 2 was shorten your titles. Why?
Yeah, once you get above 53 characters on a YouTube title, you're gonna see that little ellipsis at the end. It's gonna cut off the rest of the title. This is something that a shocking amount of channels aren't always thinking about. And you often see titles that will sort of start to set up the meat of the title in the beginning of it. For example, interview with Adrian Lurie, and then exactly maybe what it's about. You've now basically cut off the majority of the actual value you're hoping to communicate through the title by sort of taking too many characters up on just kind of giving the context. So it's important to lead with value, get as much value as you can in those 53 characters. And the only other thing I'll say about that is we're now seeing 70, 80% almost of all YouTube watch time coming from mobile. So you have to imagine, it's just, if you really are committed to growing a channel, you have to be thinking about what is my channel and what do my videos, what do my titles look like on a phone. That's going to be even more important that with the small text and the very few number of characters that are on that iPhone title, you're communicating the value and really showing people why they should click on your video.
Tip 3 is it makes perfect common sense, but get a better mic. We hate crappy audio, but what would you say is a good mic that people could use?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have probably heard of Rode microphones. I think Rode is a great company. They have a lot of very affordable options for especially people that are starting out. If you are a little more developed in your sort of content journey, you're looking for a really top of the line microphone. I'd have to say, Sennheiser makes the best of the best. It's what they use in Hollywood. It's what I'd recommend if you're looking for the absolute top-notch sound quality. And the last thing I'll say is if you are primarily doing video content, we recommend a directional mic as opposed to an omnidirectional mic. So for example, for a podcast, you might want an omnidirectional mic where it's recording from all different directions. But for video content, it's best to have a directional, like a boom mic you may have heard of that kind of is pointing directly at the subject and can best record the audio.
So our last tip for the low-hanging optimization is to organize videos into playlists. What's the advantage of that?
Yeah, so the YouTube algorithm is paying attention to watch time. A lot of people know this, but that means essentially the longer you can keep people watching your videos or staying on your channel, the more valuable your channel is to YouTube, the more likely YouTube is to promote your channel organically to new viewers. So one of the great ways to increase watch time on your channel is by organizing your videos into playlists. And so this basically means finding the videos that offer similar values or about similar topics, organizing them into playlists. That means when someone clicks on that video, they're going to see in the top right corner of their screen the rest of the videos in that playlist. If you don't do that, someone watches your video, and what do they see on the right hand of your screen? They see a bunch of other suggestions from other channels. So that will still happen. No matter what, they'll see the suggested videos from other channels. But this will allows you to get basically an automatic next up priority for them to watch another one of your videos as opposed to someone else's. And ideally, if they're organized well in that they are all offering similar value, then you're thinking about, okay, if this viewer clicked on this video because it promised them X value, and the next video in that playlist offers a similar value, you've already got a viewer who is, significantly more likely to watch that next video than any other viewer, because you know they've already made the decision to click on the first one.
Is there a limit on the number of playlists that you can have on your page?
There's a limit. I think you can add up to 12 publicly on your channel, but I don't think there's a limit to the number you can have total, but you can only have 12 be visible on your channel. We recommend making a bunch of playlists with fewer numbers of videos. So sometimes people make a playlist and they've got like 50 videos in there, but that can often be a turnoff in terms of sort of the viewer journey. They may click on one video and then they see there's 49 other videos in that playlist. It's a little overwhelming. They might, okay, maybe I'll move to somewhere else because I'm not really about to sit and watch. What if there's just 4 or 5 and they all cover something that's really interesting to that viewer? They may sit there for the next hour and watch all 5, or 30 minutes or so, watch all 5 of those videos. That you've just now added a ton of value to your channel by doing that.
So we're going to shift gears now. We're going to go to the meat of what you help your clients do.
Okay.
We've touched on it, and that is, what is video optimization? I did some research that there are 500 hours of YouTube videos uploaded every minute, which translates to 720,000 hours of video every day. So now, how do you optimize your video? Where do you start? So somebody's going to pick out your video over one of the 720,000 hours of other content.
Yeah, certainly. There's sort of 2 pieces of this. You can think of it in sort of generalist terms as extra video and intra video. So first you need to get someone to click, right? And this is essentially going to be your title and your thumbnail. Then once they're inside the video, you can do a host of things to optimize for retention, get them to watch to the end. These are the things.
Let me interrupt just a second. Now, before we leave the title and the thumbnail.
Okay.
What are some of the best practices?
Yeah. The most important thing is having a good idea. And this is really hard to quantify, but if you don't have a great idea, it's going to be really hard to have a great title and thumbnail. And the way we think about this is something we call audience-focused content. Basically, everything starts with your audience and it ends with your audience. So when we go about optimizing or coming up with a host of new video concepts for one of our clients, the first thing we do is we build out a comprehensive, holistic viewer persona. Who is this person? What are their demographics? What are their psychographics? We're thinking about their pain points, their aspirations, their values. What are they going on YouTube to try and accomplish? What problems are they going on YouTube to solve? Once we can really understand that, we develop a clear value proposition for the channel as a whole. So what is the core value that your channel offers as a whole? From there, we extend to content buckets. Content buckets are basically categories, of video ideas that you could come up with. And then finally, within each content bucket, you can start coming up with video concepts. In our opinion, based on our philosophy, if you don't do that prep work to figure out who is the audience, what's the value you're offering, how does that translate into content categories, and then what are it's going to be hard to come up with a great idea, because you're going to think, I can make a video about this, I can make a video about that, I can have this idea. But the point is, who are you speaking to? What value are you offering them? And then how do you what's a fantastic idea that person would be very excited about? So that's the first, I guess that's the first 10 steps before.
If you do this, do you storyboard it out on a whiteboard, or how do you do this?
Yeah, I mean, our company is fully remote. So this in practice, this looks like we throw together a presentation that we go through over Zoom, that we walk through with the client, and we kind of get very aligned on here's what we think, here's what we're understanding based on your who you are as a creator, what your brand looks like right now, where you want to go, who the audience is, and then of course we synthesize that with their aspirations and exactly what direction they want to take the channel.
So you've done that step.
Right.
There is in the materials that I was reading, you had a section called "How YouTube Wins." And well, actually, I'll let you summarize. I was going to summarize it as well. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to get caught up in the idea that the YouTube algorithm is this black box that we can't possibly understand. But if you really think about YouTube as a company with profit margins and marketing strategies and all these things, it's very intentional. The YouTube algorithm actually wants something. YouTube wants something, and so it's not as much that we are just at the whims of the YouTube gods, but rather if you help YouTube win, YouTube will help you win. And YouTube wants people to spend as much possible time on the platform. That's pretty much it. And so the way you do that is through, as we talked about before, people click on your video and then watching for as long as possible.
Yeah. So there were some very specific tips you had on session start, average percentage viewed, session continues, on how that's important to YouTube. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Session start is the holy click, as we talk about, measured by click-through rate, and the content of that is the thumbnail and the title, right? So there are a host of ways to optimize the thumbnail and the title. We can go into the specifics there.
Actually, why don't you?
Okay, yeah. So
I mean, I'm looking at. Let me just take a step back, because our listeners are in two categories. One are people who have been on YouTube a long time and are familiar with a lot of these things. And then there's the second category of people that are kind of starting out, that want to, that they're not starting from scratch, but they're really starting from scratch,
Sure.
So these things are all pretty important.
Absolutely. So the first thing about title and thumbnails is all of the generalist advice needs to be filtered through, again, your channel specific target audience and value proposition. There's not always going to be a catch-all rule that applies to every channel equally. However, there are definitely some best practices. For a thumbnail, it is pretty much across the board that including a human face in your thumbnail is going to increase the probability that a human person is going to click on that video. If the person is smiling in that picture, or at least making an emotional expression of some kind, that also increases the probability. We sometimes talk about thumbnail real estate, right? So you want to think about how much of your thumbnail is dedicated to specific purposes. Generally, the bigger the face is, and this can be sort of counterintuitive, but generally the bigger the face is, the better chance you're going to have of someone getting a click. And if you look at a lot of the biggest channels on YouTube and you look at their thumbnails, a person's face is taking up a huge amount of that thumbnail. And so that's sort of number one. Number two is using text to create some kind of indicator to the viewer around the story or the value in the video. So sometimes this is very obvious. Sometimes people just put the same text in the title as the thumbnail. We tend to avoid that. We think of, again, all of this as valuable real estate. So if you're, for example, putting the same text in your thumbnail that you have in your title, in a way, you're sort of wasting some of your real estate by putting the same thing twice. Another way to think about this is this, we sort of have come up with this model for the 30-second thumbnail title journey, which is that, or not 30 seconds, excuse me, like half a second journey. So basically, what we understand is that a viewer, when they're on their browse page, they're on the YouTube, first they look at the thumbnail, right? It's the most visually stimulating thing. They then look to the title to give context to the thumbnail. They then look to the thumbnail a second time with the new information or the new context they've received through the title. So if you think about this, it actually informs how you want to design each of these things. The thumbnail should immediately inspire some level of tension or conflict, or story, narrative tension, ideally. That's the most important. That's why having a face is really important there, because you're sort of anthropomorphizing, kind of whatever your video is about. The title then should be really value driven. We generally want to have the title be as explicit as possible in terms of the value your viewer is going to get from the video. So you'll notice a lot of like how to X or how I X videos that do really well. And it's simple, but it just states very clearly, here's what the video is going to teach you. And then make sure that your thumbnail is related enough to your title so that when they're seen now kind of in conjunction as one thing, it is even more exciting than the first time they saw the thumbnail. So a channel that does this well is this channel Veritasium. They have these thumbnails that are often highly intriguing, but a little confusing. They sort of make you think, what is that? What is that thing, right? Or it'll have a term like the curtain paradox, right? And you're like, what's the curtain paradox? I don't know what that is. But then the title says something like, why you can't sleep at night. And now all of a sudden I think, okay, I'm going to learn. Here's the value. Why I can't sleep at night is the value. The curtain paradox has something to do with it. And the guy in the thumbnail looks like he just had his mind blown. So I'm going to click on this to find, because I've got story, I've got value, I've got, curiosity gap. So that's I think a good example.
So you get somebody to click on the video. How important is the first 30 seconds?
The first 30 seconds generally makes or breaks the video, especially in terms of average percentage viewed. So we call this the dreaded hockey stick, right? Which is that in the first 30 seconds, you will see a rapid decline in the percentage of people that stay on your video. And this is natural. It doesn't mean that your video is boring. It doesn't mean that you're unattractive or you're not saying something valuable. It just means that the vast majority of usually at least half of people that click on a video immediately think, okay, now I want to watch something else. So your goal as a creator should be, how can I reduce that drop off or attrition as much as possible for that first 30 seconds? Because the people that stay through the 30 seconds are much more likely than anyone else, right, to watch to the end. And so the more people you can keep through that first 30 seconds, then the more people you're going to have stick through to the very end. And that's going to overall increase your average percentage viewed. So generally, and YouTube will tell you this also, but generally you want 70% is a decent benchmark. After 30 seconds, if 70% of your viewers are still watching, that's pretty good. We shoot for by the end of the video to have around, if you can by the end of the video have about 50% of people still watching at the end of the video, you have done very well. You have made a video that is highly engaging
and there are analytics that's a lot of people know about, but a lot of people don't, about where you can tell the viewer. How do you get to that?
Yeah, so
where are they on the YouTube page?
Sure. So if you go to the top right, you can click on your sort of channel logo. You can then from there go into YouTube Studio. In YouTube Studio, there is an analytics page you can look at.
I think it's the third tab down.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And then in the analytics page, there's an engagement tab. And in the engagement tab, you will see your retention for any given video.
Sliced and diced. It's pretty granular.
Yeah, it is. I think it's definitely important. There's a little see more tab. If you're looking at a specific video and the retention graph, there's a small see more tab. It's definitely important, I'd say, to open that up. Otherwise, you're looking at sort of a squashed version of the graph. It's pretty good. It lets you see certainly like every couple of seconds, kind of what the percentage is, the dips and the spikes. At Dragonfruit, we wanted to get a little more granular. So we've actually created our own sort of proprietary systems where we actually scrape all that data and do a second by second analysis where we can actually see for any given second of the video exactly what the increase or decrease is. And then we flag for any increase that's above X percentage or decrease that's above X percent above X percentage. And then we kind of translate that into a transcript of the video. And we look at, okay, during this exact 3.5 second period, this is what was being said, this is what was on screen, and we had an average drop off of this amount. And then we can say, okay, we shouldn't do that anymore, or start to identify patterns there.
So how would you advise somebody if they're just going to look and try to figure this out themselves? without getting too far into the graphs, and how can you find the trends so you can correct whatever the problem is, or do more of what's working well?
Yeah, we break this down into three categories primarily. The first is momentum. So most of the time, if your video is not doing well with retention, and so yeah, I mean, the first step would be go check out the graph. If your video is around anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes, and you're getting less than 50, 40, high 40s, 50, low 50% retention, there's things you can do to improve for sure. So especially if you're getting down in like the 20s, the 30s, you definitely want to be working on this. So most of the time, if your video is getting low retention, it's one of these three things. The first is momentum. This is basically, if you think about the sequence of ideas or events in your video. So whether you're vlogging or you're just speaking into the camera or you're teaching, whatever it is, you want to make sure that your video is clearly building to a specific point the viewer is aware of. The viewer is conscious that there is a building up to a certain spot. And people talk about this in film or TV all the time with like the 3-act structure, and you're sort of building up to the climax and the sort of the intersection of these two forces that you're waiting to see collide. And it's very easy to think about it when you think about Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, but it can become a little more vague if we're talking about an educational video or a tutorial video about how to optimize for YouTube, for example. But
Yeah.
the key is basically to immediately in the first 10 seconds make it very clear what the essential question is that you are going to answer for your audience, and then lay out your ideas in a sequence that doesn't fully answer the question until the end. It gives them enough information to keep them engaged and to make them feel like they're really receiving value and genuinely getting value from the video, but also always having that curiosity gap where, okay, but I haven't quite had that essential question answered that the video promised me. So that's momentum. If your video is lacking retention, you're most often, you may just be there may just be a little bit of meandering in the video. You maybe set out a really clear value or essential question at the beginning of the video, and you started answering it, and then you maybe sort of started going off on a tangent about something that may not be super related, or you kind of had this aside, and that often will reduce retention because people think I'm no longer in the journey. I'm no longer with this, this leading to this climax. So that's number one. Number two is what we call stimuli, which is the most, I think, what people talk about most when they think about retention. This is just what can people see and what can people hear at any given moment in your video. So how are you using music? How are you using sound effects? How are you using transitions, text on screen, full screen animations? What colors are you using? How is your video being edited in terms of the actual, how are the shots cut? One of the big ways people lose retention is they have really long takes, especially if they're speaking directly into the camera. They'll just speak and speak and speak, and the video never zooms. It doesn't cut in closer. None of the pauses are cut out. So there may be lots of ums and uhs and pauses, and you can by getting rid of all those things and cutting those out, even if you don't add visuals or animations or slides or anything, that can already increase retention. And then the very last one of the three categories is premise. And this one is a little harder to quantify, but basically when it ties back into this viewer, session start conversation. Someone clicked on your video, they did it for a reason. They were a human sitting in their computer and they saw your title and thumbnail. Your title and thumbnail promised them something, and they trusted you. They said, I'm gonna give this click. I'm gonna use my time to watch this thing because it promised me something. If you don't deliver on what you promised that viewer, you have betrayed their trust, and they will punish you for it.
They will not be back.
Exactly. And so that's just basically at any given moment in your script, in your video, stop, ask yourself, am I still delivering on the promise of the premise, on the the premise or the essential question or the key value that I promised my viewer with my title and thumbnail. And if you're not, that might be why people are clicking off.
And this is the perfect transition to the script writing, SOP, standard operating procedure. You have as the first step, create a progression or transformation-based story. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. When we think about the actual sort of nature of narrative or of story, it's necessarily temporal. It involves time, right? And when we say time, with our conception of time, what we really mean is change. Because we know, time doesn't really maybe necessarily exist in the way we think about it. What's really happening is we want to see things change over a certain period of time. And that's really sort of at the core of story. And it's kind of why story works. There's this anticipation of change. But to do that, you have to kind of create the setup. And so when you're thinking about your script, you're outlining or you're writing, you want to make sure that one, early on, you are hinting at or setting up some kind of transformation, some kind of evolution, in your story. And if you're a person that makes videos that are purely educational, or you give math tips or tips on how to use a certain, you may be thinking, this has nothing to do with my content. I don't tell stories. I teach people. So and we would argue that if you are sitting down and speaking into the camera, you are telling a story. You are, or at least if you were, you may be able to engage your audience a lot better and reach a lot more people. And so it doesn't have to be a story in the classic sense, in that you have a protagonist and they're going on this journey, right? You're not necessarily literally telling an anecdote, but you want to make sure that there is tension. So if you are giving a tutorial on mathematics.
Yeah, let's use math as an example.
Yeah, because I think that's a traditionally difficult.
Yeah. Tell me a math story.
Right. So if you are making this video about math, when we're talking about turning that into a story, it's more about the structure of your video and how to use the structure of story and apply that to your video about math. And the structure of story is, initially there is a setup with some kind of curiosity gap. Will Luke Skywalker destroy the Death Star? Will Luke Skywalker find his father? These questions right at the beginning. So the first piece of advice here is, start out with a really intriguing big question for your viewer. And this can be as long as you know that you're going to answer it within the video, right? And then, as I said before, you introduce plot points. So Luke, finds Yoda, and then he finds Harrison Ford and Chewbacca, and so you have these plot points, these moments where you can feel that we're getting closer. We're getting closer to the climax, to the moment where the essential question is answered and the point of tension is resolved. You could do this with math. You start with a big question that feels intriguing, and then you start you start giving answers, sort of breadcrumbs, as we call them, along the way. Now, anytime you can introduce metaphors, actual anecdotes, perhaps there's a way in which this mathematics theory applies to real life, and peppering in these is also really important. But you should, again, just clearly be sort of laying out these things in a sequential order that leads to sort of that climactic moment when the question is answered. And that should basically be the end of the video. We don't really think of, we don't have act threes in YouTube videos.
Yeah, which leads to the outro. There's the intro and the outro. What advice do you have for wrapping up a video?
Yeah, don't. That's generally my advice. It's another thing that's a bit counterintuitive. We tend to, especially when telling a story, want to give some sort of concluding or wrapping up of summarizing is one of the most common things that people do in YouTube videos in the last 10, 20 seconds. They summarize everything they already said in the whole YouTube video. And what you see across the board when you do this, your retention plummets. The second the viewer even has the slightest inclination that the video is ending, they click off. So generally for an outro, I recommend you, if offering any concluding sentences, they should offer some kind of new value, like, and as a final tip, maybe something like that, where you're at least providing some kind of new value or new intriguing thing. But then as soon as possible, get to a CTA. So either we pretty much, this can depend on at what kind of, how the size of your channel, how far along you are in your journey of growing your channel. But generally it's going to be subscribe to my channel, or what we most often do is click on another video, keep watching. Hey, if you like this video and you want to watch another about the same thing, check out this video on XYZ. And it's important that you really put time and thought and care into these final CTAs, because if you can get someone
CTA call to action.
Sorry, yes, CTA call to action. Because if you can get someone to watch even one more of your videos, you've now doubled their session time. Like 200% increase on their session time. Like YouTube is keeping track of these numbers, and as you mentioned, when there's hundreds of thousands of hours uploaded every day, small differences like this, they really matter. The algorithm is really noticing these things.
Yeah. So prediction time. Where do you predict YouTube will be in 6 months or a year or 3 years?
I think YouTube will continue to double down on short form video content, first of all. So as many people know, they've introduced YouTube Shorts as basically their TikTok, Instagram Reels competitor.
Yeah. So-called snackable content.
Right, snackable content, yes. YouTube Shorts is very much still sort of in the beta phase. It hasn't quite exploded in the way that Instagram Reels and TikTok has, but I don't see any reason it won't. And so I think they will double down on working on that algorithm and figuring out how to guide more users organically onto the Shorts feed. They have more active users than this, other than Facebook. They have more active users per month than any other social media platform on the planet. They have drastically higher number of watch time hours as compared to like TikTok or Instagram Reels. So they have the people and they have the watch time. It's just about, are they going to be able to funnel people into the Shorts feed? And I believe that they will figure it out. Number two, I think they will, they've already been doing this a lot on the mobile app, but I think it will become increasingly more of a long-term social media experience for users. So, they rolled out the, YouTube community posts. A lot of people are using YouTube community posts, but I think they'll probably be doubling down on that. A lot of users still haven't really caught on with it. So I'm sure they will, continue to incentivize that for new users, and make it more of a sort of Facebook experience where you actually have a consistent news feed that you're rolling through that has both community posts, sort of tweet-sized, written form, as well as videos, as well as images. And yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons you've seen YouTube continue to dominate. I mean, they have continued to adapt and create more and more of a social media-like experience as opposed to simply a video consumption experience.
So if this is my last question. So where can people find, if they want to work with you or get more information about your company, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, well, you can find us at dragonfruitmedia.co. That's .co, not .com. That's our website. You can find out about the services we offer, whether production or analytics, and how we can work together. You can reach out through there. You can send, anyone, if they're listening, can send me an email directly at adrian@dragonfruitmedia.co. I'm happy to connect with you. And then finally, we actually set up a fun landing page with the podcast. So with creative influencers. So if you want to go to dragonfruitmedia.co/Pfeiffer, that's John's last name, Pfeiffer.
Pfeiffer.
There it is. We actually have some free resources. Some of the resources that you mentioned today in the conversation, John, YouTube script writing, 5-day email course on, a lot of the things that we talked about today, but going even more into detail and even, including visuals and more tips and tricks. So if you want to go and to dragonfruitmedia.co/Pfeiffer, you can sign up to receive those free resources. And hopefully they are valuable to some of the listeners.
Well, this was great. Thank you. I'll come right back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again for having me.
That's it for this time. If you enjoyed our podcast, please write a review on iTunes and tell your friends to subscribe. If you have any questions about influencers or suggestions for future episodes, email them to John at Pfeiffer@pfeifferlaw.com. Thank you for listening.